All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the mini-series that I got going on here. I've already come out with about 2 or 3 different videos, and according to my notes, it looks like I might be coming out with a couple more. I want to hurry up and wrap this up here before the off-season gets to be too far underway and the draft is too far behind us. So this particular episode, we're going to be concentrating on the transition of into the professional ranks as a collegiate athlete, and the complications that could be associated with that transition to the next level. Now, one of the things I want to definitely go into first, jumping right on into this episode, is I wanted to talk about one of the major things about the transition from college to pro, of course, is the money. And I mentioned it a little bit on character flaws, the character flaws episode of this mini series, and so I won't necessarily go into too much elaboration as far as the financial part of it goes, and the millions of dollars that get thrown at these young men's lives after the college level, getting bumped up into the NFL. But the one angle that I will hit from it, from a financial standpoint, is the business decision making portion. This is something that college athletes have not had to deal with, and they're going to be basically thrown into what is proverbially known as the deep end of the business side of their profession. And that is very much it. It's become a profession at this point. They're going to have to make professional decisions, both on the field and off the field. And by professional, I don't necessarily mean as in upstanding or professionalism. I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about that it is very much a real thing for a player to make a business decision on the field in regards to their well-being, in regards to their health. They've got to take those things into account, because once you're in the league, your number one goal at that point is to A, get paid, and to B, get paid for as long as you possibly can before it's over, because before long it's going to be over. You're going to be in a league where the league average, I believe, is like 2.5 years, maybe possibly 3 years, and then that's it. You got a couple of years to make really, really good money before you're out. There's a lot of guys that are at this league that play for a lot longer, but those guys are a few and far between, and their talent level is way, way up there. So those are things you don't necessarily want to take into consideration when you're going into the league. It's just at that point you want to try to make it last as humanly possible. And you're going to be in the middle of the deep end with individuals who've been swimming in that deep end for a number of years. Some veterans that know their way around that pool. Some veterans that know and can teach you how to navigate those waters if you're willing to learn. And some of those individuals, for them, it is difficult to learn that stuff. Now, making a business decision off the field, a lot of the things that you would possibly do in college may not necessarily be something that you'd be interested in doing at a professional rank, because those decisions could be just as detrimental to your career as the ones on the field. You can ask any number of individuals who've been caught in domestic violence situations, gun charges, drug charges. We've got a couple. In fact, we've got our starting left tackle, one of the best left tackles in the game right now, is an individual who's pending basically one more charge for narcotics or for drugs or for off the field banned substances or what have you, to where he's going to be serving a lengthy suspension. So you have off the field decisions that you have to make as well. You can live your life, but just one slip and you could be on the outside looking in, not getting paid. Some of the individuals, moving along from the financial portion of it, there's also issues with being able to transition to a league where everything is ramped up. Everything is way, way more complex, way, way more advanced. Some individuals have a hard time adjusting to certain scenarios, certain demands that are going to be placed on them, certain schemes. In college, you pretty much run a particular scheme, and that's kind of your scheme and your one-trick pony moving on throughout the entire series of your franchise's existence until the next coaching staff comes in. You've got a finite number of years to play college ball before the guys behind you end up taking your place, and it shovels up and up and up. So you don't want to change scheme too much at a collegiate level. At a pro level, you're going to have a massive influx of players every year. And being that you're so good at every single position, you're going to be able to make a few scheme changes, a few things, some more demands on your players to make you more robust. And you have to be able to know them all. It's like going into MMA and only knowing wrestling. If you only know wrestling, then you're going to be good at the wrestling portion. But when it comes to the stand-up game, you're going to be struggling against individuals who know how to throw their hands. You want to be knowledgeable in all of it. It's kind of that way a little bit in the professional ranks from what I see, because I think a lot of us know a number of individuals that have come up and have been drafted into the wrong particular scheme and have not been able to adjust because they're used to things being a certain way from the collegiate level. So those are things that you have to take into consideration when a recruit comes in from the college level, is how are they going to be able to transition, making the money that they're going to be making, being able to adjust to the scheme. If you're already running a scheme that they are particularly used to, or that they recognize, you can bridge the gap on this exponentially. But not a lot of players have that luxury. Even players at the lower ranks of the draft, it's not so much the fact that you're looking at scheme, it's just the athletic ability at that point. You're going to hope to hell that they're going to be able to make that transition. If not, you're going to end up having to cut them. So those are all things to take into consideration. Also, there's no time off. And the collegiate level, it is kind of considered a year-round sport, but you also have, you have school, and you have your education, you have other things that you take into consideration. That's where the bulk of your education comes in, because during the regular season of football, you don't really have a whole lot of classes pertaining to your major. So that's a time for a lot of these guys to heal up and to get the bulk of their credits in, whereas opposed to pro, you've got a lot of other things that are going on, whether it's the preseason, whether it's the camps and stuff like that. You have a couple of months in which that you have to yourself, and for a good portion of these professional football players, those couple of months are spent getting surgeries and going through rehab and trying to rehabilitate from those surgeries. There's people out there that have surgeries, although back in the day when I first started watching professional football, those things were on the DL. You didn't really know a whole lot about the extensive surgeries that each one of your players received in the offseason and the recuperation process to be able to get back to 100% before camp started. But nowadays, with the advent of social media and the internet, those things are a lot more out in the open. So if somebody goes through rotator cuff surgery or ACL surgery or something, you pretty much kind of know who it is going into the off season, and that way you know to look for them and how their performance is coming along, or the rehab is coming along in the off season when it comes to camp. So those things are a little bit more in the limelight, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's individuals out there going through surgeries that not a whole lot of people know about what's going on. So those are things that are going to be brand new to an individual coming into the league, is that it's pretty much a year-round sport. It's not like you're going to have about a good 5 to 6 months off, a practice here, a practice there, and that's pretty much it. It's a year-round sport for a lot of these guys. Also, moving up to the next level, your shorter margin of error. Your margin of error at the next level is extremely short. You have shorter windows in which to operate, much tighter windows. The game is a hell of a lot faster. The hits are harder, there's more experience, and there's an all-pro tag over every single position on the football field, which is light and day beyond what it is that these kids are used to. Most of these collegiate football players, they play in a conference where there may not necessarily be a whole lot of talent. This is where I think some of the SEC schools are a little bit better off than other schools, because their competition against each other is so high. But if you don't play in that division or that league, then you're going to be playing against teams maybe 2-3 times a year where you'd be challenged as a team or as a football player. But all the rest of the games, you got a lot of Joe Blows, Joe Averages that are out there playing with your splattering of super talented individuals here and there. At the pro level, it's every single position. Every single position has a player that is probably one of the best that they had been at the college level. So your margin of error is much, much tighter. Your ability to operate freely and to do the things that you do best is on a much, much smaller stage. And a lot of people have a hard time transitioning to that level. They have to realize that to be able to get to the performance level in which they're expected to perform may take a year. It may take 2 years. It may take a little bit of time for them to grow into that, depending upon certain factors. But a lot of people may not necessarily be able to take that. In my opinion, one of the things that made Robert Griffin III a bust was the fact that he had a hard time, in my opinion, being able to compensate for the fact that everybody on defense is awesome. That a lot of people in certain positions. Actually, every position is fast and big and can hit hard. I mean, his career was pretty much ended by Haloti Ngata, who is a defensive lineman that chased him down. Now, I can't think of an individual that chased him down in a sprint at the collegiate level. So seeing that at the next level, I'm pretty sure was a really, really big shock. But that's kind of the idea of what I'm getting at. It's difficult, I think, for a lot of these players to come into the next level to realize that you're not going to be able to dominate like you did when you were in college. You're not going to be the fastest. You're not going to be the most talented. There's not a whole lot of weakness on the other side of that football. That the success may not necessarily come as instantly to them as it did in high school or the college level, and they may have to rely a little bit more on the positions around them rather than being the one to rally the team through your skill set. You're going to have to rely on other individuals, and that requires a certain amount of humility. And not a lot of these guys, in my opinion, come with a certain measure of humility. There's a lot of players out there who have a ton of talent, and can play at the next level, can perform at the next level, but the thing goes on up in their head that they're not able to quite live up to that expectation. And a lot of it's in their head, it's in their heart, and it's in their head. It's not the outward extremities that's setting them back. It's one of those things that I think that helps bring those players down, I think, is the inability to transition to the next level, the inability to cope with the fact that they're not the greatest player on the field, that they're going to be playing opposite of people that can actually make them look bad if they're not necessarily careful. And it's difficult for them to come to terms with that. One of the things that's going to help those players be able to move beyond that situation is being able to realize early on, and being able to realize that there are a lot of teams out there that study film, I'm pretty sure, at a much higher level, or much higher profession. I don't necessarily know if the technology is that much greater. That's a whole lot of football that I don't know about. I'm pretty sure it's roughly the same, but I think that just given the skill set of the individuals that they're going to be playing with at the professional level, these are guys that work really, really hard to find weaknesses in opponents' games, try to find tendencies, try to find trends, try to find habits. And I think that comes a little bit easier at the pro level because that transition isn't necessarily there like it is in college. I think that the more you have to rely on the things, on the skill set that you had coming up from college, the more of a detriment that you're going to be at the next level. You have to be able to break yourself down a little bit and learn new things, learn out what your weaknesses are to be able to work on them, the things that you do that people are starting to catch so that you don't necessarily go in towards that direction. And I think a lot of it could be said of running backs and quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks. If you have tendencies and trends, those are things that people pay very, very close attention to, and those are teams that you're going to be playing against that are very, very good at exploiting them. Probably not so much on a collegiate level because the talent's not necessarily there, but at a professional level, it happens all the time. How many times have you seen a rookie quarterback come in and do really, really well, and then all of a sudden the next couple of years, it's just not there? It's because the game has moved beyond. The game has been able to find out weaknesses and trends that they have, and the defenses have been able to compensate, and that player has not been able to move and do something else, be able to do something different, and isn't moving from that trend that they continue to do. So those are things to take a look at as well, is how well are some of these players transitioning to the next level as far as their skill set, as far as their mental capacity, and as far as what it is that they do to try to get out of those normal trends. Confidence is another thing. Confidence and self-esteem. You can lose confidence. I'm talking about confidence and self-esteem from two different spectrums here. Confidence and self-esteem mainly from your self-esteem, your self-confidence, also the team's confidence and the team's esteem, mainly the confidence that they have in you. Those are very, very fragile things, and you don't want to lose either one. You don't want to lose confidence in yourself, and you don't want the team in that locker room to lose confidence in you either. Those are things that once you lose it, it is very, very difficult to get those things back, and it's something that you can't fake. You're talking about individuals and players that have been playing in the league for a very, very long time, and they understand weakness. They get what it is that you're trying to fake. Coming into that huddle and not having confidence in the play that you are calling, it doesn't matter what play you're calling at that point. If they don't have the confidence that you're going to run it, it doesn't matter what you call. They're not going to have faith in you, and it's not going to get executed to the level in which it needs to be executed. And those are all things that fans cannot necessarily do anything about. I've been in huddles before. Where people have called plays, and you just know you kind of feel like you're alone on it. You kind of feel like you're hoping that somebody else would kind of pick up the mantle and move it in a direction that's more positive, because the person that's in charge of this offense and or defense doesn't have it. It's not in their eyes. It's not in their passion. It's not in their fire. Or they've done something to bring that confidence into jeopardy, and they haven't been able to get over it. Those are things that you don't necessarily want to lose. That locker room dynamic is very, very important. And honestly, to tell you the truth, guys, it's very, very easy to get that confidence back. Whether it's your self-confidence or team confidence, the only way that you can get it back is to win. That's the only solution. So really, getting it back is easy. Being able to achieve it, however, it's not necessarily so easy, because wins and losses, even though they are a dime a dozen, it's very, very difficult to accumulate, X number of wins at the professional level, not unless you're really, really good or play for a really, really good team. So for some of these lower end teams, it's a little bit harder to gain those things than it is for the teams that are consistently in the playoffs. Now, some of the things that needs to be taken in consideration too, as far as the confidence portion is concerned, sometimes teams misevaluate players. Teams misevaluate players all the time. We're talking about humans. We're talking about individuals that are making estimated guesses. They're taking a look at certain trends, or taking a look at certain facts and certain data points to be able to decide whether an individual is going to be a fit on their football team. And you can't get it right all the time. And if you're an individual who gets those things right all the time, you're going to be a very, very rich and a very, very well-compensated individual, and you're going to have a job in the league for a very, very long time. And not a lot of people have that kind of security. Most people don't have that kind of security. So that's one thing to take into consideration, is that teams misevaluate all the time. They bring in players for what they think is the right reasons, and then they find out after they get there that maybe this person wasn't necessarily the right fit for us. Maybe this person doesn't necessarily fit with the dynamic of the team, does not fit with the symmetry does not fit with the chemistry of the football team. We misevaluated this individual. It's just not working out. Those are things that don't necessarily build a whole lot of confidence. Those are things that don't necessarily build a whole lot of wins, and can drastically affect the outcome of your season. Most of the teams that have a really good team around them and have a really good nucleus, a really good core, are teams that consistently go to the playoffs and constantly have winning reputations and winning schedules. The teams that usually pick in the top 10 in the draft every single year are not those teams. Those are teams that are always in constant flux. Always a lot of players coming in, always a lot of players going out, looking for that winning formula, and they've been looking for it for years and years and years. Honestly, our team, the Washington Redskins, could be considered one of those teams where we just quite haven't found that core nucleus, and that's what we've really needed to work on for years, is to be able to find that core nucleus of people to kind of build around. That's something that is very, very few and far between, and very expensive and very hard to acquire. Sometimes these draftees just come in and they just don't necessarily fit. Now, one of the things that needs to be taken, and it's also another thing to bring into the effect of the spectrum as well. Some of these players are brought in for depth. They're depth pieces. Somebody that you're getting into who has a certain skill set, has a certain ability to play a position, but maybe there's a guy that's a professional who's been playing at that position, a veteran, a very well-respected veteran at that position, that you're going to be backing up for a couple of years. It could be a couple of years before you're really decided, where a team really knows whether you're going to be a fit or not. And if you end up spending your time being a backup for a couple of years and playing special teams, and all of a sudden you get into that number one role and it's not quite working out for you, that's a hell of a sacrifice. That's a lot that a team has invested in an individual just to find out years down the road this person's not going to work. Those things happen. That's the gamble. That's the sport. That's the game. That's the way it's played. That's the way it is sometimes. Sometimes you misevaluate. One of the things to take into consideration, guys, is I think also what's almost just as important as drafting correctly in the draft and bringing these players and taking all these things into consideration when you're bringing draftees in, is that you also need to take a look at the rookie contract expiration dates on some of these individuals who are playing for other teams. You want to be paying attention to those things too. That's one of the things that's going to be interesting to find out, is if there are scouting services, professional scouting services that we pay a lot of money to, or if your team pays a lot of money to pay attention to those types of players. If there was a player that you wanted in the draft, but say the Kansas City Chiefs drafted him a couple of rounds before you, it would not behoove that team to just snap their fingers and say, oh, shucks, well, I guess we can forget about him. You don't want to forget about him. You want to keep him in the back of your mind. You want to keep a file on him. You want to be able to keep an eye on his performance and see how it is he's doing, because if there's a chance that he just does not fit the Kansas City Chiefs football scheme, you're talking about an individual who could end up getting cut in 3 years, and you're talking about, if this person's going to be a free agent, maybe you could go out and put a bid on that individual to bring him into what you think would fit in your scheme. And now we're talking about somebody who's probably more valuable than a draft pick. You're talking about an individual who's already played at the next level, who's got that professional experience. And that's one of the things that's hard about the transition process, is we're talking about college athletes that have virtually no experience whatsoever playing at a professional level. Regardless of how much money we were paying them or the expectations, a lot of these guys are what are considered babies. Daisy fresh rookies, still wet behind the ears, have not played a single down of pro football, don't know what it's like other than watching it on television, and that is it. The more reps you take out on that football field, the more you're out on that football field from snap to snap, the more valuable you are as a commodity, assuming you're healthy and that you're young. So if you have an expiring rookie contract and it quite hasn't worked out with the New Orleans Saints and you're looking for a job elsewhere, some of those guys are really good to pick up. Some of those guys are going to fit a scheme that you're looking at running, and maybe bringing those individuals in. I think that's how a lot of these really good teams have been able to stay good, especially you take teams like the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots are well known for doing this. They don't want to pay a whole lot of money for skill set positions, even though there's a lot of teams out there that do. They're going to take the cast-offs, the castaways. As long as we have certain positions that have certain veterans playing in those spots, Tom Brady, then you can bring in whoever you want for him to throw to, as long as they have a certain skill set. If they're on the cheap and they can run the route and catch the ball, then he's going to be successful in Tom Brady's system. Maybe that's an individual that you could look at, whether it's a defensive back who's played nickel for 2 years, with any team, with the Minnesota Vikings, and it just hasn't quite worked out with the Minnesota Vikings. He's been hit and miss, and they don't necessarily want to go in a different direction as far as the draft goes. If he's a free agent, bring that individual in. So some of the research that you do on your NFL draft can also be poured into the individuals who are already in play. And maybe if the downturn is on them and is not quite, their stock is not quite up because of their performance with that team that they're on, doesn't necessarily mean that person is going to be a bust. For all you know, that person's just a bust in that system, in that scheme. He could play a lot better in your scheme. He could end up being very prolific if he comes to play for you. So those are all things to take into consideration when you are looking at players that are making that transition from the NFL level, or from the collegiate level to the NFL level. That transition from those two stages is astronomical. And like I've said in some of my previous videos, that there are clinics out there, there are coaches, there are all kinds of people that put on all kinds of programs to try to bridge that gap a little bit, to narrow down that learning curve just a little bit, because we're talking about multi-million-dollar investments here. Every single year in the offseason, we have NFL draft prospects that could bring millions of dollars of revenue towards your team. But the transition from college to pro is so huge. It is so huge that you try to bridge that gap just a little bit closer as much as you possibly can, to try to bring those guys along a little bit more, as the years go by. And as far as I know, that gets a little bit harder every year, especially when you got more successful teams running gimmick plays that's successful at the college level. When by the time you get to the pros, that stuff's not working, and the commodities are not quite the quality of those commodities are not quite up to par, because some of these guys are used to running gimmick offenses, gimmick defenses, all these little dog and pony show schemes that look good when you're playing against collegiate football teams that you may or may not see for the next 10 or 15 years. Unfortunately, at the next level, it is something that needs to be taken into consideration, because it could cost you millions of dollars. It could cost you several years in a wasted draft pick if you're not necessarily careful. So that's some of the things that really there's a lot of people out there that love the argument about college and pro. Just on a side note before I wrap things up here, I love to watch college football. I'm not as prolific as watching college as I should be, but One of the things that I'll tell you about watching college football is that I don't enjoy it nearly as much as pro. And the only reason why is because I see flaws at the collegiate level all the time. I see flaws in the collegiate level. I see angles that are very, very poorly taken, but it doesn't matter because you're playing college. You can afford to take bad angles. You can afford to mess up a little bit on plays. You can afford to be a little flashier. You can afford to go one-on-one against defenders and take chances and risks a little bit more and make things look extravagant and grandiose at the collegiate level, but it's not going to work at the pro. It's not going to work at the next level. You can't afford to take bad angles, at the pro level. You can't afford to go out and put on dog and pony shows at the pro level. That transition between college and pro is so important. It is so drastic. That was something that I definitely wanted to get into one of these episodes as far as this mini-series is concerned, because I don't think a lot of people take that in consideration. They see something that works at Florida State and they think it's going to work, for the Seattle Seahawks. It doesn't work that way. And then you end up seeing that middle linebacker from Oklahoma come up and who's a big, big deal. And then by the time he gets pro, it's like, what happened to this guy? This guy turned into a bum. All of a sudden, you gave him millions of dollars and it went to his head and he turned into crap. That's not necessarily it. A lot of times, it's just that transition from college to pro is so vast that a lot of people can't bridge that gap. Some people can, some people can't. And your guess is as good as mine as to who those individuals are. I just try to point out some of the pitfalls, some of the reasons why that gap is so huge. So that's going to do it for this episode. Hopefully I shortened it up long enough. I got a couple more of these things to kick out. Let me know what you guys think. If there's any questions that you have, put them in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and share. We'll catch you guys next time for the next episode.